As railway modellers, we've all made mistakes in the gear we've bought, but buying the wrong airbrush equipment can be costly, and one hopefully I can help you avoid. In previous videos I've used airbrushes, and I've had quite a few requests for more information on them. In particular, Paul and his son Tom from Brentley Junction and many others have asked what sort of airbrush I use and what would I recommend and so on. The thing is, I don't really consider myself an airbrush expert. I'm kind of self-taught. I bought one, gave it a go, kind of figured it out, and step by step, in baby steps if you like, a crawl, walk, run type scenario, I've improved my skills, and now I'm not that intimidated when I airbrush a nice brand new locomotive. At first I was using an airbrush and I was actually blowing 16-ton mineral wagons across the room. You kind of live and learn. As you know, I'm a member of the West Camel Model Railway Society, a club down in deepest, darkest Somerset, and a couple of times a year on a Saturday, instead of meeting just on the Saturday morning, we meet all day and we have an airbrush day, so we all hone our skills and try new techniques. And that's how I've kind of brought mine on from learning from other people. Okay. But of course, just buying an airbrush is quite simple, but there's a few other things you might need. Clearly you need an airbrush, but to go with an airbrush you'd also need some kind of breathing protection. And before you embark on buying all this kind of fancy stuff, you really do need to invest in the whole package rather than just the airbrush and a compressor. So this is a decent breathing mask from 3M, and particularly useful when you're dealing with cellulose paints and enamel paints, and it's my kind of breathing mask of choice. You can also use a much cheaper, kind of more disposable breathing mask, again from 3M. It's a straightforward piece of kit, but I wouldn't trust it to work so well with a more toxic paint than acrylics. But that's where we are. So what else do you need? You need your airbrush, you need your breathing equipment, you also need gloves. If you're spraying paints close up to locomotives and all the rest of it, clearly you might have to hold them, and in this case you really don't want to put the paints and the nasty carcinogens that are in there all over your hands, so you need kind of hand protection. And what I tend to do is pop down to the local B&Q and get yourself some disposable gloves. You obviously need extraction depending on where you're doing it. You might want to go out and do this in your garage, and you might not need extraction if you've got a decent mask, because the fumes might just dissipate straight out the garage door. However, if you're in an enclosed space like this room, I use a hose that pokes out the window and that draws the fumes away. And again, you need to buy these before you start. The last thing you want to do is figure out, I'm kind of getting a sore throat and I'm breathing in all these nasty fumes, perhaps I need to stop this and go and buy an extractor. The next thing you need is obviously paint and some cleaning materials to go with it, because once you put the paint through the airbrush, it's going to need cleaning. Acrylic paints are quick drying, they're less toxic. Enamel and cellulose paints aren't so quick drying, they take a while, and they are more toxic, but they do run cleaner through the brush, so you don't get the same kind of residue building up. But these are the things you need to think about before you embark on buying them. So you need your airbrush, your compressor, your safety equipment as in your breathing, your gloves, obviously paint, and a cleaning mechanism to go with the brush. So you might need something like this. This is a spray cleaner from Howes of Oxford. There's another one here which is an airbrush cleaner, but you have to invest in these before you start, because otherwise your airbrush will get filthy and you can't get the wretched thing clean. So what did I do? Well, a good while ago, many few years, I broke one of my basic rules saying if you buy cheap you'll buy twice, and that's exactly what I did. And I bought this. It's the budget kit Z, can't read upside down, yeah, Z budget kit from Iwata, and it's this oh sorry, and the whole thing came to £112.38 including VAT. And you get a little baby compressor and this little nifty airbrush, which I shall show you. So let me zoom in a little bit if you can see this. So there we go, nice little sexy airbrush, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a good, efficient Iowater airbrush. I must admit I am biased. I only buy Iowater airbrushes. I've never bought another company. I've seen other ones when we have our modelling days with the club, but this really is the kind of airbrush of choice, and some of them come with a 5-year warranty. This is a straightforward, small, weathering type airbrush. You really wouldn't want to use it on anything big like respray and locos because of this tiny cup size. So outside of doing weathering jobs, this isn't really ideal. Going back to the basics of these things, this is a double action airbrush. So when connected up to your air supply and having filled it with paint, when you push down on this, the air supply comes on, and then when you pull it back, you get more and more paint as you open up a valve inside, and then when the air whistles through, on this one it's a gravity feed down and draws the paint out, and it comes out in a spray. So the more you pull it, the more you get, but it is a double action airbrush. Double action airbrushes are better than single action airbrushes. If you wanted to just do a little bit of drying of your paint work, you can just press it down and you'll get air without the paint. It's the kind of way to do it. This has served me well for a good few years, but once I got into doing things like weathering track, then you really know the shortcomings of having such a small paint reservoir. Which takes me on to the airbrush I'm currently using. And this is the, can't read upside down, let me have a look, it's the Iowater Revolution, says on the end, R2000 BCR. Now, I mentioned BCR because that refers to, I think it's it is a double action airbrush. Again, you can get this airbrush in a single action, and that really isn't what you really want. Now, this little airbrush is, well, from my point of view, is brilliant because your air supply goes in here and it doesn't have a cup in the top. What it has underneath is a small opening to which you can pop in your bottles of paint or whatever, and you whack them in underneath, and then the paint is drawn up into the airflow. So, as I said, a double action airbrush, so when you push it down, the air comes on, and as you pull the knob back, it draws more and more paint through and out of the nozzles. When you finish with that paint, and let's say we were doing a bit of track weathering, so you're putting down something like say sleeper grime, and you're finished with the sleeper grime, and now you want to do a bit of a black oily effect around, say, a signal or the end of a station, that kind of thing. With this smaller airbrush, what you would obviously have to do now is empty the paint out of the cup, perhaps give it a clean through and a blast and all the rest of it, and then crack on with your next colour. Whereas this little beauty, what I tend to do is put my finger over the end, pull it back, and then the air then blows the paint back into the container. Get rid of the container, take another container, which is this one here, and this is always filled with airbrush cleaner. So I pop that onto there, I give it a couple of good blasts, and it blows through the last colour, which was the sleeper grime. Good to go. Again, turn it on again, get rid of the airbrush cleaner. If necessary, you can always whip out a cotton bud and then clean out the orifice underneath, okay? And cotton buds, all cotton buds aren't born equal, okay? I use Johnson's cotton buds. Johnson's aren't paying me to make this advert. Johnson's cotton buds, because the tips tend not to break up, so you don't get the loose fibres inside the airbrush. So I always use these. Again, you get what you pay for. So I'm then ready to go. So I load up my next colour, which might be a black oily residue, and away I go again. And I haven't had to stop for more than 30 seconds to muck about with cleaning out the airbrush. And you would naturally program your weathering, let's say, especially if it's track, to work from your lighter colours to your darker colours, so you wouldn't necessarily see any of your black on your sort of beigey type weathering that you might decide to put on some brickwork or whatever. But that's what I use. I really like this airbrush, and if you want to, I will leave a link in the See More tab below to what they are. So this is an Iwater Revolution BCR. And it's a great little airbrush. I love it to death, and it came with a 5-year warranty, and it was £125 just for the airbrush. As I said, these things are never cheap, but before you commit to any of this, try to find a friend or colleague or whatever who's got an airbrush, give it a go with theirs, see if you like that kind of thing, because it's an expensive asset really to buy. You could spend easily £200 or £300. You could easily spend perhaps £300 to £400, let's say, setting yourself up, not forgetting the price of your booth. So what did I get with that little cheapy again, an Iwater one? Let's not forget what it is, this little Iwater airbrush. Well, it came with this little compressor, and I think they're called something like an elephant compressor. I'm sure this one is probably, well, not I'm sure, sorry, this one may not be available anymore, home indoor use, by Sparmax, S-P-A-R-M-A-X, by Sparmax, made in Taiwan, and I can't really tell you any more about that. Maximum pressure is 40 psi, which is 2.7 bar, and it's a great little compressor. One thing that it hasn't got, which is almost vital, is a pressure gauge, so you don't know what pressure you're poking out. Now, when you're weathering track, or let's say, it's not that critical as long as you do a test run with your paint, with your airbrush, before you commit to the track. And I always do a test run on a piece of paper to make sure the airbrush isn't spluttering, you're not getting blobs coming out, and I'm getting the right kind of misting that I'm after. So if in doubt, you need to turn the air pressure down to get it to flow properly. So what does it come with? Well, there's obviously a power cable, if I wasn't in such a pickle here. Let's have a little sort out. There's obviously a power cable. Where's the... Try and get that out of the way. And then there's the air line, which has obviously got a coiled coil tube that goes up to your airbrush, and that one there, where's the little one? And naturally I've inserted a water catching device in there. I'm sure there's a proper name for that, but it escapes me at the moment. So that goes onto the bottom of the airbrush, and you turn this on and away it goes. Quite straightforward. And then all you do is this collects the water, the condensation that may be in the tube and coming out of the compressor, because the last thing you want is ordinary water inside one of these, because you'll get a mineral build-up. So you really need one of these little water catching devices. So there we are, quite easy. It's just a pain, like most airbrushes, to clean afterwards, but it's a great little starter pack, and it costs me £112.38, something like 4 or 5 years ago, and I bought it, I think it was from the Airbrush company at a show in London at the Alexandra Palace. I think that's where I got this from. But as a starter kit, it's good, but as the old saying goes, if you buy cheap, you'll buy twice, and I soon outgrew this because of this cup arrangement, because it just doesn't hold the volume of paint that I wanted when I was doing a bigger weathering task. And when I went to see Adrian at Lord & Butler and to take some advice from him, because he's known as Dirty Boy and does weathering as part of his sort of duties with Lord & Butler, he used this, the Iwater Revolution with the under supply on it, the bottle that goes underneath. And as soon as I saw him use that, I was sold on it. And if he can use that all day, every day, then it's good enough for me. So I did outgrow this, but that's not to say I don't use this. I still do, but I must confess I don't use it with this compressor because I would much prefer to see what the actual air pressure that I'm getting is. So what do I use instead of this compressor? Well, I use one of these. And apparently it's identical to the same model from Iowata. And I'm told by a very trusted source, let's say, that this model has come out of the Iowata factory, and it's not labelled up as Iowata, so you don't necessarily get the kind of lifetime guarantee, but you get it at 2/3 of the price. And I think this one cost me around £80. Sorry, £80. But what it does have is a valve on it, so you can see what the pressure's doing. And if I just kind of zoom into this, hopefully you can see the valve here, and it's adjusted by this knob and this locking flange. And if you were to buy one of these and try and set yourself up, there's an important thing you need to know. If you're going to, let's say, do some weathering of a bit of track and you think that 12 psi might be a good idea, and it really is, but you don't set 12 psi on the gauge. You open the airbrush up first and start the airbrush and the compressor running, because then the pressure will drop. And it's that dropped pressure you then adjust to 12 psi. Otherwise, you'll find that if you're actually pumping out at 15 or 18 psi because the way the compressor works. So start it up, just run it in the, because I mean it's a double action airbrush, so just press it down, get the air coming through the airbrush, then adjust the pressure so that you get the required 10, 12, 5 psi, or whatever you're after, and you'll get a much better paint flow. Underneath here, as you can see, there is another one of these little water catcher devices, again to stop water entering in the airbrush, and you're getting a mineral deposit which no kind of airbrush cleaner will wash out. It'll end up like, you know, if you imagine the way kettles fur up in a hard water area. Anyway, this is the little beastie that I use, and to be perfectly honest, it's been absolutely faultless. It sits on the floor, it vibrates a little bit, and it doesn't have, which some of the professional spec ones might have, which is another tank which keeps the pressure extremely constant. This one must fluctuate as the compressor works, so the pressure may well, say, drop from 10 and then come back up to excuse me, 12 psi, and it might fluctuate within those parameters. Whereas if you buy one of the much more expensive ones, which has another tank, so you get the air from here pumped into that tank, which then gives you a much more constant airflow, but you pay for that. I think those things come in at kind of perhaps around in the region of £400. But if you've got that kind of budget and you've got that kind of requirement, you know, work-wise, then perhaps you need to do a little bit more of investigation on the internet. Anyway, so that's the start of it really. I think this was around about 80 quid. My airbrush was, I think, 125, just put my readers back on, 125, and that kind of set me off. These bits and bobs, the breathing mask and that kind of thing, you just have to do your own research there, but whatever I can find on the internet when I finish this video, I'll put in the links below, and you can do a little bit of research yourself. Okay, moving on to paint. There's basically acrylic or enamel, and there's also a cellulose paint. Acrylics are water-based and enamels are oil-based. So what I would always do when I thin my paints down, I would always use, let's say for this Humbrol paint, I would naturally use Humbrol thinners. It kind of makes sense. I kind of say it makes sense quite a lot, don't I? Anyway, so I'd always use, if it's a rail match, I'll use rail match thinners if I can, that kind of thing, because it is it is kind of mixed up, especially for this type of paint. So, you know, these things aren't expensive, and rather ruin a paint by putting the wrong kind of thinners in. That's what I do. I mentioned earlier that you can get paints that are mixed, if you like, for airbrushes, and these are from the Comart range, and they're pre-mixed, and as you'd expect, there's a variation of colour in this little packet, and in here there are 10 various shades all mixed up ready to go. And to be honest, it's quite a good way to start. There is a drawback, of course, and that's the fact that you'll tend to use one paint more than another, and therefore you get left with the kind of the rarer colours are kind of left behind. And in this pack comes dark rust, light rust, raw sienna, old oil, blue grey smoke, orange, white, sorry, opaque white, fertile soil, soft dirt, light dust and smoke. So there's a good variation in there, but you know, I tend to find that I might use the kind of sienna and the rusts more than some of the others, but it's always worth using those first off to get a good go. So I also mentioned about something called Alclad-Paints. Now these, you've got to watch these because they are celluloid based, and they don't necessarily work with every other paint, so you can't necessarily paint over them or use them as a top coat. But if there's one point to this video, this is the bit you really ought to remember, and if you can save this video for future use, just in case you ever start mixing your own paint, this is the good bit. This is the right consistency to mix your paint. They say that it's the consistency of skimmed milk. So let me try to zoom in so we don't mess this up. So hopefully you can see that. So in here is that Alclad 2 grey primer. And I'll try not to get it on my best blanket. And this is the consistency you're after, that it drops in nice clean droplets like so. And this is very thin, and you can see the way, hopefully, that it falls off this steel spatula. I like these spatulas, these steel ones, because you can clean them up quite well. So look how close we can get. There's a fly buzzing around my head, and hopefully you can see that that is the consistency you're after for airbrush paint. So that's what you want to kind of thin it down to in nice shaped droplets. And if you use a tool like this steel kind of spatula, where's that fly? Like this steel spatula kind of thing, you can see the consistency you're after. Now, if I put this away and hopefully not make a mess, go a bit wider, and now what I do is try to mix up some of this Humbrol 85, which I used on the oil tank weathering a while ago. Pop that into an empty pot. Hopefully you can see all this. Oh no, give it a stir first, Charlie. You fool. Yeah, it's still mixed up from before. What I do when I've finished, rather than leave it in these small containers, I do backfill it into the pots. Now this is, hopefully you can see, that flies back, hopefully you can see what this is like now, and it kind of, you can see that it's too, you can see it's too thick for an airbrush. It's just coming off in one big globule. So what we'll do is we'll thin some of this down to what I consider to be airbrush consistency. So we'll pop some out in there. Beautiful. Let's try and keep it clean. And then, having bought yourself a pipette, what you want to do is decant some of your thinners into your container. This way you can control it better. So we'll pop some drops in there, and to kind of get you kind of get the idea of the consistency you need over the years, you know kind of what it kind of looks like. And that, did I get black paint on this blanket then? And that's the kind of consistency. We're almost there already. No, not quite. Now hopefully you can see that that is pretty much where we were with that grey, with the grey primer just a second ago from Alclad. If you find you over thin it, I would tend to ditch the paint. Adding more paint doesn't really make it thicker. It doesn't kind of work in reverse. And there, is the consistency I'm after. So that is what I would consider ready for an air gun, and it's got the consistency, as they like to call it, of skimmed milk. Of course you could always just go and buy some skimmed milk and do your own comparisons. Right, we're getting mucky now. Now before we go over to the spray booth and do a bit of just a quick bit of spraying, because this video is probably getting far too long as it is, I just want to say a little bit about manufacturers' warranties. The manufacturers obviously have something to say when you've sprayed your brand new Tornado 462 locomotive with sleeper grime all over the valve gear and the connecting rods and all that kind of palaver. They won't be best happy when you turn around and say this loco doesn't work anymore. So the best thing to do from the point of view, if you buy a loco and then you want to weather it, is clearly the first thing you want to do is run it in and make sure that it runs absolutely perfectly prior to any weathering. Also make sure that the body shell is in absolutely pristine condition. There's no bits missing whatsoever, again, before you start your weathering. Look at the state of me here. Before you start your weathering. Then make sure that you weather the components separately. Don't weather the body shell and the chassis at the same time. Take one off and do them separately. And here is an old Hymec, the state of my hands, an old Hymec that I weathered. I bought from a show, and then here's one that I weathered. Hopefully you can see there is some difference. I think these body shells cost me 50p. They're the not so nice old Hornby ones, but they work quite well. But it gives you an opportunity to have a go at your roof dirt and your sleeper grime and all that kind of palaver, and get the hang of a paintbrush and how it works without damaging decent stock. So that's what I've done. But from a manufacturer's point of view and the warranty, you've got to be exceptionally sure that the locomotive is in perfect working condition before you turn around and start spraying up, especially the wheels of steam locos, and then find that it doesn't work very well because you've ruined them. And also, so keep those bits clear. You could use a little bit of oil to make sure the paint doesn't stick to it, and then obviously you need to clear all the wheels off afterwards to make sure that they get good contact or good conductivity between the rails and the wheels and the pickups, and make sure everything works fine. So that's where we are. You've hopefully taken on the paint mix, so you'll know the consistency you're after, and then you're all ready to go with your paintbrush. Okay, so here's my setup with the extractor booth, and you can see the hose hopefully going out of the window. Sun's coming through that window, hence the exposure's a bit kind of over the top. But as I zoom in now, if I can adjust the exposure so you can see a bit better, so we haven't got so much backlight, you can see this little device here is an airbrush holder, and then in the booth itself I have a rotating turntable just to do the rolling stock, and then here is my good old breathing setup. So here's a little exercise that I've sort of come up with. I've got the airbrush there, the one with the underfeed, and all I've done is put my initials CB on this piece of paper. So what I'll try and do is to use this airbrush So my voice will be a little bit hidden by this breathing mask, and I'll see if I can go over my initials with the airbrush. If you turn the airbrush on full, all you're going to get is a great big splodge of paint. And this is at 5 psi, so you can see that the airbrush will still kick out a lot of paint. But if you do it delicately, then hopefully and keep your hand reasonably still, you can get a reasonable amount of control over the airbrush. If of course I hold the paintbrush down, the button allowed down for more paint to come out, of course out comes more. And it's simple exercises like that that allow you to develop your airbrush skills, and then obviously venture on to your rolling stock and take it from there. Well, hopefully that all made sense, and now you're about to zip out and buy your own airbrush gear and live happily ever after. Or of course I've talked you out of it and you'll never buy an airbrush as long as your body has a pulse in it. It matters not, you know, which way you do things. I like to look at my layout and think it looks more realistic, which means some weathering on the track and the detail, and some weathering to locomotives and rolling stock. We're all different, but please take on advice that I said. Buy your airbrush with care. I would always go for Iwata. They are a far better company than most others, and perhaps choose a compressor to which you can fit, or comes with a pressure gauge. It makes it easier. The best thing to do, of course, is go and try it out on someone else's first. Give it a go. If you're a member of a club, someone will have a airbrush set up. Give it a go and see if it's the kind of thing that suits you. And then if it is, buy your stuff, and then it's baby steps. It's a crawl, walk, run procedure. You do need to try out your techniques on your older rolling stock, the scrap stuff out of the bin. Try it out on there before you go and blast a lot of sleeper grime all over your 125 and ruin it. So there we go. Remember, baby steps and buy with care. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and there may be another video here, and there may be one here if you're watching on the YouTube app. There was a link previously to my other YouTube channel, and hopefully you'll join me on there when I start putting those together, those photographic videos. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye bye.